Welcome to Crypto 101, a first principles jargon-free course on blockchain and its impact on financial services. We will now start learning about decentralized finance, popularly known as DeFi. We will first learn what DeFi is. Then, we will deep dive into one example of a DeFi application called Uniswap. Decentralized finance refers to the provision of financial services on the blockchain via smart contracts, without the intervention of a centralized entity. We can think of the financial services ecosystem on the blockchain as a three-layered stack. At the base is the blockchain platform. This consists of infrastructural elements like nodes, addresses, private key cryptography, consensus mechanisms like proof of work. On top of it are four categories of crypto tokens. Finally, at the top are applications that use the bottom two layers to deliver financial services like loans, brokerage and investment products. The top layer can be provided by centralized entities or decentralized entities. The term Web3 refers to all applications built on the blockchain. The term DApps refers to applications provided by decentralized entities. The term DeFi refers to a subset of DApps that are financial services specific. Next, we will do a deep dive on one illustrative example of decentralized finance, namely Uniswap. Uniswap is a decentralized exchange where buyers and sellers can trade crypto tokens without the presence of a middleman entity. Unlike traditional stock exchanges, Uniswap is a decentralized exchange. It performs the same function as a centralized exchange like Nasdaq or Coinbase. But it is not owned by any entity. The tokens that can be traded on Uniswap are Ether and any token, which conforms to the ERC-20 standards. Hence, only fungible tokens can be swapped. Before we delve deeper into Uniswap, we will orient ourselves with some basic trading concepts. Most stock exchanges facilitate trading via maintaining an order book. An order book is simply a list of all unfulfilled buy and sell orders at any point of time. This is a hypothetical order book. On the left side, there are sell orders for 1,000 shares at an ask price of 123.01. The list goes on with quantities listed against the ask prices of sellers and bid prices of buyers. In our example, since the highest bid is lower than the lowest ask price, these orders are unfulfilled. The order book changes every second as orders flow into the exchange. You submit an order to buy 500 shares via an online app. The trade is routed to an exchange. Assume when submitting your trade request online, you specified that you are not willing to pay more than 123. 400 shares are bought at 122.85 and 100 stocks are bought at 122.91. The trade is electronically executed using a matching algorithm. If the broker had submitted a bid below the lowest ask price, the order would simply get added to the order book as an unfulfilled order. At the point a match is found, it drops off the order book. Order books involves matching buy orders and sell orders. But a market maker buys from the seller at a bid price and sells to the buyer at the ask price. The market maker thus assumes the risk that the price of the security will fall before she sells it. The market maker keeps adjusting the bid and ask price based on changing market conditions. Have you ever noticed that you can always sell or buy securities listed on an exchange? It never happens that you can't find a buyer or seller. This is because exchanges have market makers who are constantly publishing prices at which they will buy and sell. If a security is very risky, the market maker will quote a much lower price for buying as compared with the price quote for selling. An exchange that operates an order book must also ensure there are market makers for all listed securities. Otherwise, there is a possibility that customer orders remain unfulfilled if a match is not found in the order book. For order book exchanges to work, two types of central entities are necessary. First, an exchange operator to ensure that all listed securities have a market maker. Example include the New York Stock Exchange and Coinbase. Second, market makers who choose this line of business for commercial reasons. An example of a commercial-driven market maker is Citadel Securities. But a truly decentralized exchange like Uniswap must not require any such central entities. Let us get more specific. Consider someone who wants to buy the stablecoin Tether with Ether on Uniswap. For this trade to happen, two things must be true. First, there must be inventory of Tether in Uniswap. Second, Uniswap must quote a price of Tether in terms of Ether. We have to answer two questions. How does a decentralized exchange like Uniswap ensure that there is always an inventory of crypto tokens on both sides of a trade? How is it ensured that a price is always quoted for every token? The answer to the first question is a liquidity pool. The answer to the second question is a mathematical function called constant product market maker. Next, we will look at each one. A liquidity pool in Uniswap is a pool of token pairs that are contributed by individual token holders. Crypto token holders who choose to put their tokens into the liquidity pools are called liquidity providers. Liquidity providers earn fees on every trade that is executed against the pool. Imagine you held shares of Apple and contributed them to your brokerage firm. And every time somebody bought your Apple shares or sold them back to the brokerage firm, you got paid a fee. The inventory of tokens held in a liquidity pool are referred to as the pool's reserves. The price of tokens is determined by a formula. Uniswap uses a formula called the constant product market maker to determine the exchange rate between the two token types in a liquidity pool. Next, we will delve into this further. Assume that there are two tokens in a liquidity pool: Ether and Tether. The quantity of Ether is X and quantity of Tether is Y. Note that we are talking about quantities and not their respective dollar market values. The formula simply requires that the product of X and Y before and after a trade remains constant. This constant is called K. This is also referred to as the invariant. When a trader wishes to buy one of the two tokens from pool, she must pay to the pool a quantity of token such that the value of K before and after the trade remains the same. Let us quickly summarize. The inventory of tokens required for trading is contained in a liquidity pool that consists of contributions from token holders. The price is determined by a formula. The formula used by Uniswap is called constant product market maker. Other decentralized exchanges may use other formulae. All this is still very abstract. Hence, we will now use an illustration. Alice holds both Tether and Ether in her portfolio. In this scenario, Alice is the first and only contributor to a Tether-Ether pair liquidity pool. For the time being, let us assume that Ether and Tether are not listed on any other exchange in the world. Alice starts the pool with 1 Ether and 1,000 Tether tokens. In Ethereum, this means that she transfers ownership of these tokens from her Ethereum address to the liquidity pool smart contract address. At this point, it is useful to identify the two different players in Uniswap. Liquidity providers or LPs deposit their tokens into the pool. The act of depositing tokens into the liquidity pool is different from buying and selling tokens. That is done by traders. Traders swap tokens with Uniswap. They add one token type to the pool's reserves and withdraw the other token from the Uniswap. While depositing tokens and swapping tokens are conceptually different, both result in the transfer of tokens between the Uniswap smart contract address and an externally owned account. Bob is a trader. He buys 500 Tether tokens from the pool. He knows how much Tether he wants to buy, but how much Ether does he need to deposit? The rule is that the impact of a trade on K should be neutral. For K to remain constant at 1,000, Bob must pay 1 Ether for 500 Tether. The price of the trade for Bob is at an exchange rate of 1 Ether equals 500 Tether tokens. The liquidity pool held tokens at the exchange rate of 1 Ether to 1,000 Tether. But the act of buying Tether reduced the price of Ether and increased the price of Tether. One way to think about this is that buying each incremental Tether made the Tether token more expensive. The first Tether token was bought at original exchange rate of 1 Ether to 1,000 Tether, the second token at 1 Ether to 999 and so on. On an average, Bob paid 1 Ether for the 500 tokens. Bob makes a second trade. This time he wishes to buy 250 Tether tokens. The liquidity pool has 2 Ether tokens and 500 Tether tokens. K is equal to 1,000. To maintain K at 1,000, Bob must pay 2 Ether tokens for 250 Tether tokens. Hence, the price of 1 Ether has fallen to 125 Tether tokens. We can graphically depict the relative price of one token versus another via this graph. As the supply of any one token in the pair increases, the relative price of that token decreases. This makes intuitive sense since Economics 101 tells us that increased supply should cause price declines. If more people keep depositing their tokens in the liquidity pool, the size of K will become bigger. For instance, if token holders deposited 10 Ether and 10,000 Tether tokens, then the size of K will be 100,000 instead of 1,000. Hence, when we say K remains constant, what we mean is that the impact of an incremental trade on K is neutral. We can now visualize a decentralized exchange as a set of smart contracts, which are known as exchange contracts. Each of these exchange contracts consist of two elements. First, a liquidity pool comprising of an inventory of token pairs, contributed by liquidity providers or LPs. Second, an algorithm to determine prices. In the case of Uniswap, it is the constant product market maker. So far, our understanding of Uniswap is incomplete because of many simplifying assumptions we made. Now, we will introduce 5 concepts that are key to understanding Uniswap fully. First, is the concept of slippage. Second, is the concept of trading arbitrage. Third, is the concept of liquidity pool tokens. Fourth, is the concept of impermanent loss. Fifth, is the concept of concentrated liquidity. Let us go back to our original example. The liquidity pool began with Alice contributing 1 Ether and 1,000 Tether tokens. When Bob purchased 500 Tether tokens with Ether, he had to trade at a price of 1 Ether to 500 Tether, so that K remained constant. When Bob made his second purchase, the price of Ether fell to 125 Tether tokens. Hence, Bob's second purchase was much more expensive than the price at which the previous trade was executed. Slippage refers to the difference between the current market price of an asset and the actual fill price of an incremental order. Next, we will review an intuitive explanation. Let us say you want to buy a share of Apple. The last Apple trade occurred at $100. You submitted an order for 1 million Apple shares. You were expecting to pay around $100, but there were not enough sellers at that price. The exchange picked up some shares at 100, some at 110, others at 150, and went on this way till 1 million shares were acquired. Your average price was $130. This is a 30% slippage. Let us delve into the mechanics of slippage in Uniswap. The beginning exchange rate in the Uniswap liquidity pool was 1 Ether equals 1,000 Tether. However, this represents the market price of buying one incremental token. In other words, this is the price of a marginal trade. In our example, Bob purchased 500 Tether tokens. Next, we will view the mechanics of what actually happens behind the scenes. On this graph, point P represents the quantities of Ether and Tether corresponding to the beginning exchange rate of 1 Ether equaling 1,000 Tether. There was 1 Ether token and 1,000 Tether tokens. Point Q represents the ending position post the first trade where there were 2 Ether tokens and 500 Tether tokens. The exchange rate at this point is 1 Ether to 250 Tether tokens. The trader purchased N1 tokens at point P for an exchange rate of 1,000 Tether to 1 Ether. Another N2 tokens were purchased at exchange rate of 1,000 to 999 and so on. The sum total of the Ns is 500, which is the total number of Tether tokens purchased by the trader. In our example, the trader, Bob, purchased 500 Tether tokens from the liquidity pool. Point P represents the price of the first token bought and point Q represents the price of the 500th token. The average price at which Bob's trade was executed was 1 Ether to 500 Tether. The difference between this average price and the price implied in point P is the slippage. Let us go back to our Apple example. In that example, the buy order of the trader was fulfilled from several sell orders. This is exactly what is happening here. Each infinitesimal range interval in the curve represents an open sell order at a specified price. The entire inventory of tokens is distributed across the curve. In our example, Bob experienced massive slippage. However, that is because the quantity of Tether Bob was buying equaled 75% of the liquidity pool's supply. In the stock market, such large slippage does not occur for names like Apple and Microsoft. That is because no single buy order is massive compared to the supply. The same dynamic plays in the crypto market. We will now go back to a more realistic illustration of the liquidity pool. Assume that Alice initiated the liquidity pool with 10,000 Ether and 10 million Tether tokens. Bob is now buying 5,000 tokens from this liquidity pool. The original pre-trade K is 100 billion. When Bob buys 5,000 Tether tokens, the supply of Tether falls by 5,000. For K to remain 100 billion, the supply of Ether must increase by 5. Hence, Bob must pay a little above 5 Ether tokens into the pool. Bob makes a second trade of 5,000 tokens. Again, the supply of Tether falls in the pool by 5,000. Bob must again pay a little above 5 Ether tokens into the pool. We can now calculate what price Bob paid for the first trade and the second trade. For the first trade, the price paid for 5,000 Tether was 5.003 Ether. This means price of Tether is 0.00100005. For the second trade, the price of Tether is 0.00100015. That is a slippage of 10 basis points between the first and second trades, not the kind of dramatic slippage we saw in the earlier example. Next, we will cover the second concept of trading arbitrage. So far, we assume that Ether and Tether did not trade anywhere else. The calculation of slippage is purely internal to Uniswap. However, in reality, Ether and Tether trade in centralized exchanges like Coinbase. The concept of trading arbitrage introduces this idea. Alice initiates the liquidity pool with 10 Ether and 10,000 Tether tokens. The reason for this ratio was that 1 Ether traded at 1,000 Tether tokens in other exchanges. Assume Alice disregards this ratio. Instead, she puts 10 Ether and 20,000 Tether tokens into the pool. This means an incremental Tether token can be bought from this pool at a much cheaper price than on centralized exchanges. Next, we will see what happens. The initial value of K is 200,000. Bob buys 5,000 Tether tokens from this pool. To keep K constant, Bob needs to pay about 3.3 Ether into the pool. This implies that he is buying approximately 1,500 Tether from the liquidity pool per unit of Ether. In contrast, in a centralized exchange, he would only get 1,000 Tether in exchange for 1 Ether. Now Bob takes the 5,000 Ether and redeems them for Ether in a centralized exchange. Since in a centralized market, 1 Ether equals 1,000 Tether, Bob can get 5 Ether in exchange. Hence, Bob has made a neat gain of 1.7 Ether. Traders will keep trading against the liquidity pool till equilibrium is reached. It is not logical for Alice to let traders arbitrage against her by contributing tokens in a liquidity pool, which is outside the current market exchange rate. Liquidity providers contribute the two tokens to a liquidity pool pair in quantities such that the ratio of the two quantities reflect their current price in the pool. We will get back to the concept of the current price shortly. Next, we will see what happens under this equilibrium scenario. Alice contributes 10 Ether and 10,000 Tether tokens into the pool. The price of 1 Ether in other exchanges is 1,000 Tether tokens. Hence, the liquidity pool is in consonance with what exists outside the pool. Say Bob wishes to buy 50 Tether tokens from the pool. To maintain K as constant, he needs to contribute 0.05025 Ether. Effectively, for every Ether he contributes, he is getting 995 Tether from the pool. This makes no sense because he could get 1,000 Tether per Ether in a centralized pool. Hence, the liquidity pool is in equilibrium when the quantities of the two tokens are such that their market value outside the pool would be equal. We have said that liquidity providers must deposit tokens in ratio of the current relative price of two tokens. But how does Uniswap know what the current relative price of the two tokens is outside Uniswap? The answer is that it does not. Uniswap does not look up prices in other markets. The current price of a token in Uniswap is simply the ratio of the total quantities of the two tokens in the reserves of the liquidity pool at any point of time. Uniswap assumes that any divergence from external market prices will be arbitraged away by traders. Liquidity providers must deposit tokens in the ratio of the current price. The only time an LP can deposit tokens in arbitrary quantities is at the time of the first deposit as a pool. The ratio of first deposit sets the first price. We can synthesize by stating that the current price in Uniswap reflects the price of buying an incremental token from the relevant liquidity pool, and is derived by dividing the total reserves of the two tokens in the pool. Trading arbitrage refers to the opportunity to trade with a liquidity pool for the sake of making profits out of price differences with other trading venues. Every time a trader trades with the pool, she pays trading fees, which are distributed to the liquidity providers. We will learn more about these fees in the next lesson. At any point of time, the ratio of the two tokens in a liquidity pool will represent the market price of the two tokens, as whenever the two diverge, traders will arbitrage with the pool and bring it back to equilibrium. Uniswap requires that any new token deposits must be in the ratio of the quantity of the two tokens in the global pool at the time deposit is being made. The only time this requirement is waived is at the time of the first deposit. But even there, the first liquidity provider has no incentive to deviate from the price prevailing in centralized exchange at the time of the deposit. This brings us to the end of part 1 of the lesson on DeFi and Uniswap. We have covered 2 of the 5 concepts needed to understand Uniswap. In the next lesson, we will continue learning about the other 3 concepts. But before proceeding to the next lesson, please review the summary of the current lesson.